Supposed biblical error. Were there synagogues in Galilee? The Gospels record that Jesus went preaching through Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel. However, Robert Price asserts in a few of his books that there is no archaeological evidence of synagogues throughout Galilee in the 1st century, except for 2.
There is no archaeological evidence of synagogues in Galilee in the 1st century. And now there are 2 exceptions. One at Caesarea, if I forget the other one, but a Hellenized town. And the point is that synagogues were established outside of Palestine for diaspora Jews, since they couldn't easily go to the temple. Well, when Hellenized Jews from the diaspora came back home to their ancestral homeland anyway of Palestine, some of them needed a home away from home at home. But it's no coincidence, therefore, that the 2 we know of were in these centers of Hellenized diaspora Jews that had returned to the homeland. But that's it. There are no native Galilean synagogues that early that we have any evidence for.
Now this clip is almost 10 years old, and I cannot find Price making this claim since then, so I'm not sure if he still asserts the Gospels are anachronistic when they claim there were synagogues in Galilee during the time Jesus existed and lived. However, even with that, the claim still needs to be addressed, regardless of if Price has abandoned this argument or not. The truth is, we do have sufficient literary and archaeological evidence for synagogues in Galilee during the 1st century. Decades before Price made this objection, archaeologist Eric M. Meyers noted, the Galilean or Basilical Synagogue is the oldest of all Palestinian synagogues. In that, startling new discoveries at Gamla and Golan, at Tarichea on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, and at Herodium and Masada in the Judean wilderness have established that the earliest synagogues in ancient Palestine existed in the 1st century CE. Chad Spigel notes the synagogue at Gamla was constructed in the early 1st century CE. Steve Mason says, a substantial number of ancient synagogue structures have been discovered in Judea, Galilee, and the Golan, including those at Hamat Tiberias and Sepphoris. Although the visible structures most often come from the 3rd and 4th centuries, Gamla and some Herodian sites have yielded pre-70 meeting places, large rectangular, fairly simple structures. Adding to this, recently a rural synagogue was found around Mount Tabor, which dates to between 20 and 40 AD, supporting the notion there were rural synagogues throughout Galilee during the lifetime of Jesus. A synagogue at Capernaum has also been found and fits with the Gospels that record the presence of one there. The research indicates it was a fairly large synagogue, which also fits with the implications of Luke that it stood out as a noticeable structure. So given this archaeological data, we can say we do have evidence of synagogues in Galilee during the 1st century and during the lifetime of Jesus. However, some might argue that these sites are disputed, as we can never be entirely sure they were synagogues due to a lack of inscriptions and distinguishing features. But early synagogues prior to 70 AD do not appear to have had any specific features that separated them from other types of buildings, like what we see with synagogues of later times, thus making them harder to identify. Paul Flesher notes, these features add up to a rather plain, unadorned public building. There is so little decoration in that the only thing that indicates its Jewish character is its location in a Jewish village. Moreover, these structures display no religious markings. They are obviously public buildings, but archaeologists cannot tell if they were built for worship or other religious activities, or whether they basically constitute a town hall or a meeting place for a village governing council. However, the literary evidence from that time period suggests early synagogues were multi-purpose or local communal buildings. For example, in the works of Josephus, we see evidence that local places of prayer were being used as schools, for communal meals, and for political meetings. One might argue that these places were not specifically synagogues, since Josephus uses a different word than the Greek word we see in the Gospels. But in the works of Philo, we see these buildings could also be called synagogues. Flesher goes on to say, literary sources from that time indicate that a variety of activities took place in synagogues, some religious and some secular. Synagogues are described as providing as meeting places for worship services, schools, and councils of elders. They also serve as banks, hostels for travelers, and large banquet halls. So perhaps the image of the synagogue in Jesus' time was as a large, multi-purpose building whose religious function was just one of several roles it played in the community. Likewise, in the Gospels we see that synagogues were used for more than just religious activity. Matthew, Mark, and Acts say they were used for courts or public punishments. Matthew 6 implies they were used to collect and distribute charity money. So the synagogues of Jesus' day that the Gospels speak of do not match the specifications of the synagogues of later centuries, which were religious buildings that were distinct and stood out from other buildings. The synagogues that the Gospels refer to seem to have been local communal buildings used for a variety of activities, which would fit the archaeological and literary data on synagogues prior to 70 AD. So instead of references to synagogues being anachronistic, they fit with the cultural context of Judea and Galilee prior to 70 AD. Furthermore, early evidence in the works of Philo, Josephus, and other documentation suggests synagogues were part of the Jewish culture in the 1st century. So why do some skeptics assume the references to synagogues in the Gospels are anachronistic, but do not argue the references in other works are also anachronistic? Why are only the Gospels guilty? In reality, the Gospels mentioning synagogues throughout Galilee during Jesus' ministry doesn't seem out of place whatsoever, given the archaeological and literary evidence. Thus, this supposed error can be resolved.